You have this bias towards slow medicine because what you said, or the way you put it, is what's harder earned is longer lasting. And I also definitely have that intuition. It makes sense to me. And maybe though you're agnostic on this topic, but I wonder how you feel about the rising popularity of and research into medically overseen psychedelic treatment for addictions, because I just have the sense, I mean, I hear about it so much that a lot of it is I mean, maybe this is my bias. I think a lot of it just has to be totally overblown and a product of our tendency to just want a quick fix. And people have this dream now that a dose of mushrooms or 8 doses supervised by a therapist is going to cure all their problems.
I agree with you. And it is a fact that the media hype has far outstripped the evidence. The evidence is very preliminary. And if you look, in fact, at the evidence for treatment of mental health disorders, it's not robust. And especially not robust for psychedelics. So things like psilocybin in the treatment of depression. There's a New England Journal of Medicine study comparing psilocybin to Lexapro, which is an FDA-approved serotonin reuptake inhibitor, finding that they're pretty much comparable in terms of efficacy, which means that psilocybin is not a breakthrough medicine, right? It's not going to solve our mental health crisis. Furthermore, we know that these are potentially very dangerous drugs and that people can have full-blown bad trips and end up ending their lives under those circumstances. And the more access we have, the more we're seeing those types of very bad outcomes. Whereas I have never heard of that with, an SSRI. I mean, there's, some sense that it can contribute to suicidality, but not psychosis and, sudden violence. But even sort of phenomenologically, I have a real problem with the way that these medications are being proposed to work, which is that they're not being put forward by the scientific community as treatment by themselves. It's problematic in its own way, but they're actually being recommended as a way to facilitate psychotherapy. And the reason that really bothers me is because what we're saying to people is, you need a drug to have a human attachment. And part of the huge work that we do in addiction medicine is trying to educate people about how to have intimate human connections without using drugs. Because many, many patients and people in general don't know how to connect with other people unless they're under the influence. So I just think the whole framework is highly problematic. Also, when you look at sort of the spirituality scales, because what goes along with this is this idea that people can reach some kind of new spiritual awakening through this process. But if you actually look at the way they're measuring spirituality and the spirituality scales, it sounds a heck of a lot like getting high, right? Do you feel like, you're elevated and that you feel one with the universe? It's like, yeah, that's how people feel when they get high. I mean, so, what are we actually measuring there when we talk about spirituality? Plus, is it really changing behavior for the long term? Do people, they might feel more spiritually connected, but are they actually living more spiritual lives? So I think there's so much here. I'm all for, rational and slow and measured research and media coverage that is tempered. But the problem is that by getting out there and just saying this is we'll give you a spiritual awakening or it'll cure your depression or your PTSD, before you know it, you've got the TikTok video and then you've got all kinds of people microdosing themselves, that's just so scary.
Yeah, I'm really glad that I asked you this because I found all of that quite interesting, especially that comment you made toward the end about the way that they are measuring how spiritual people feel. Yeah, that is just what it's like to be high. And this is also totally anecdotal, but everybody I know that has gone to Peru for the ayahuasca journey or anything like that and comes back saying that they're totally transformed. They may say that they're totally transformed and they may keep that up for a few weeks, but it quickly goes right back to exactly what they were like beforehand, which goes back to, and again, this is obviously all conjecture, but it goes back to your initial hunch that what is harder earned lasts longer. Mm-hmm. But like you, and I think this is what I hear, I'm totally, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm totally open to new forms of treatment that might include some of these drugs, but I'm also skeptical of the levels of efficacy I hear on these podcasts. It's also, you have to question the interest, because the people who are trumpeting the drugs are the people who were already taking them and so in love with them. I mean, not to say that there aren't researchers who have never taken them themselves and are much more sober about it, but I think that because of who it's coming from, it often needs to be taken with a grain of salt.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I don't know of any other area of pharmacologic research where the people doing the research and profiting from the companies that may ultimately make and distribute these drugs are also people who regularly do them themselves or have done them. So I think there's a lot to be skeptical of.